synopsis or the overall thematic aspect. So this is the reason I feel that all of you have by and large understood now what Salman Rushdie is doing by his essay, Commonwealth Literature Does Not Exist. I tried to give you the definition of the word Commonwealth, how it originated, and what exactly is meant by the term Commonwealth literature. And Salman Rushdie, in fact, is protesting against this branding or this kind of a labeling, putting a kind of a label on certain writings and with a definite purpose of belittling the writers and showing them that, well, they don't really deserve to be considered with all other writings in the canon of English literature by the white men. So continuing from where we left last time, I proceed now to discuss the succeeding part of the text. We already, if you remember, we talked about Salman Rushdie saying how a particular ghetto was created. A narrow kind of a demarcation is made. A kind of a grouping is done. And writers who are non-native English men, they are not Englishmen by birth, and who write in English, irrespective of their quality, are put together under this ghetto and called Commonwealth Writers. Salman Rushdie is at the same time making a very interesting point when he says that unfortunately, this particular hypocritical stance that has been taken by the white men is by and large made successful because of the ghetto mentality amongst some of the Commonwealth writers themselves. So it is not simply the British people, or for that matter, white people, who did it. They could not have been successful had the Commonwealth writers or the professors, critics who belong to these colonies, the erstwhile colonies of the British Empire, had they not supported it, it could not have been so successful. And then he says that, mark it now, what is he saying here? He says that of the beast distracts attention from what is actually worth looking at and what is actually going on. And the main purpose is not simply to make two categories purely on the basis of non-native and native English writers, but because the real intention is to derogate, demean, and in that way not allow somebody who is a very good writer or author to be considered at par with the English native writers. So mark that in the bargain, what is happening is the quality is ignored. What is written, how is it is written, is not really taken into consideration, right? Rather, in a very arbitrary manner, in a very whimsical manner, simply on the basis of the nationality or the color of the skin, an author is designated into that category of Commonwealth. And that is the reason Rusdie says, therefore, I need to spend some for some more minutes on these risks that are there in accepting this tag of the Commonwealth. I'll begin from an obvious starting place. English is by now the world language. Try to understand what is now the next argument. So English is not really now restricted only to England or UK or countries where the mother tongue is English. It achieved this status partly as a result of the physical colonization of a quarter of the globe by the British. So that is the one fact, that the British virtually ruled over 1/4 of the entire world. And it remains ambiguous but central to the affairs of just about all the countries to whom it was given, along with mission schools, trunk roads, and the rules of cricket. So these are the three other important factors by which the British also expanded its power and dominion. Mission schools, for example, Christian missionary schools, right? There also the British and the English native people, they also in some way or the other influenced the language of a particular nation. Trunk roads, we know that the highway roads which keep on moving from one place to another and connect each other, and the rules of cricket. The cricket, cricket was actually invented by England, and now a number of countries play cricket. So these are the three other ways and methods, argues Rusdie, that these three, mission schools, trunk roads, and the rules of cricket, by virtue of these three, the British also extended its control over a number of countries, and overall, the language it is impacting. But its present day preeminence, now another important point that Rusdie is adding here, its present day eminence is not solely is only, perhaps not even primarily. He says it is not even the main reason. Okay, the result of the British legacy. It is also the effect of the primacy of the United States of America. So he is now bringing in another very significant factor why English is given such prominence. And that prominence has nothing to do with England, but is solely by the fact that now America has become the first world country, is the most powerful country, economically, technologically, and in many other ways. It is controlling the business, the industry, and a number of things, you see. So obviously people require to know the language of Americans, and which is obviously English. So this second impetus towards English could be termed a kind of linguistic neocolonialism. This is a very important term that Rusdie is using here. So you have different ways, how you can colonize and how you can really expand your control over a country. And here, in fact, that is what America did. So obviously, though England colonized 1/4 of the entire world at one time or the other, America now, in the present scenario, is controlling the world of trade and industry and many other aspects. And because their native tongue is also English, it might be here and there different from how the British speak and how they write their spellings or how they express certain things. But then overall, after all, because Americans also have English as their mother tongue, see, according to Rusdie, this is the second kind of colonialism. They are also forcing all other countries to converse with them, to exchange opinion with them in English. So that is a linguistic neocolonialism. It's a beautiful term that Rusdie is using here, or just plain pragmatism on the part of many of the world's governments and educationists, according to your point of view. And for practical purposes, when you want to do global business, when you want to exchange things with others, You require a language by which you can express yourself and communicate. And therefore, English is here virtually getting that status of the international link language. As for myself, says Rusdie, I don't think it is always necessary to take up the anti-colonial, or is it post-colonial, cudgels against English. Cudgels means weapons. So he says, well, I'm not really against English. Try to understand. So there is a clear distinction that Rusdie is making. And that distinction we all have to understand. So on one hand, he is talking about English as a language, and another English as the nation, English as the race. Okay, the British, for example, or the Americans. See, so his objection lies against this particular British mentality that divides and that doesn't allow all other writers and authors who write in English, but who are not by birth Englishmen, right? And tagging them as Commonwealth. So he says, well, my weapon or my fight is not against the British, right? Not against the English as the language. What seems to me to be happening is that those peoples who were once colonized by the language are now rapidly remaking it. That is one very important point that we have all to understand. Right, my mother tongue might not be Bengali, but if I learn Bengali in such a manner that I can really contribute to it, I can express properly, I can write literature, I can coin words, I can express it beautifully. So what am I doing? I may not be a Bengali by birth, and still I am helping the language to grow further, enriching it further. And that is what Rusdie is saying, that what logic can you really have of saying that, well, all these authors are inferior just because they are non-native English writers? Because now these writers are writing in a language which might be English, but then they are remaking it. They are enriching it further. They are taking it further, right? Domesticating it. Try to understand. Domesticate normally is, when you have an animal, you domesticate the animal and the animal helps you. Here, in this context, domesticating means using a language which is actually a foreign language, but then adopting it for your own purposes, for your own country, for your own culture, right? So what you are doing, you are using English in a very supple manner, like an elastic, you are adjusting and you are adapting, you are making some changes here and there, okay? So in the bargain, what is happening is that English is growing and becoming a better and better language, becoming more and more relaxed about the way they use it. So gone is that tension that I'm speaking in a foreign tongue. Now English is not really a foreign tongue. English is one of the languages that many people living in India speak perhaps more fluently than any other language. So how can you say that English is now only monopolized by people who live in Britain or who are by birth British or Americans? Assisted by the English language's enormous flexibility and size. Mark that. That is what I was just stressing upon. That every language has that suppleness, that flexibility, and if you can reuse it properly, if you have that kind of mastery over it, well, you can make a language your own, whether you are born into that linguistic territory or whether you are by birth that person, doesn't matter at all. So they are carving out large territories for themselves within its frontiers. So Rusdie is saying that actually what these so-called Commonwealth authors are doing, they are beautifully expanding, enriching, developing this language. And therefore there is no reason Rusdie argues that they can be really termed inferior to the English people and English, proper English, traditional language and literature. To take the case of India, now he comes to one particular type of the issue. In one definite angle now he's dealing with it. He says, now let us move to, let us take it to Indian situation. So to take the case of India, only because it's the one with which I'm most familiar, I can write with more confidence about what happened in India, what is happening rather in India. The debate about the appropriateness of English in post-British India has been raging ever since 1947, right? Since we got our independence, well, there has been arguments that, well, we should not really embrace English. The British has gone, and along with the British, English should also, the language English should also be banished. We should not really encourage English. We should speak in Indian tongues and all that. But today, I find it is a debate which has meaning only for the older generation. He says, well, it might be this argument perhaps is now only valid for people who used to live earlier. Now the modern generation, the next generation, the children of independent India seem not to think of English as being irredeemably tainted by its colonial provenance. Provenance is the chronology of the ownership. Who owns it? So it's not really a question for the new generation, like people like you, or even people like me. I'm born also in independent India. So for us, English is not really a language which is monopolized and owned by the British or the Americans. English is just a language, just like Hindi is, or Gujarati is, or Bengali is. So there is no more any argument being given and accepted by this generation that, well, English is something which is tainted, that, well, we should not really speak in English, write in English. Okay. They use it as an Indian language. So now if you are reading English literature, I raised this issue earlier also in the two earlier classes which we earlier had. I said that, well, the unfortunate thing is that in India, still no university had the guts to introduce English literature written only by Indian men. Interestingly, Commonwealth literature, Indian writing in English, is just only studied as one of the papers. So still we don't have that courage of reading English as an Indian language and accordingly framing a course on the basis of that, and just reading one paper of British English literature or American English literature, right? So he says, Rusdie says, they use it as an Indian language. So English has become an Indian language. So how can you now put that Commonwealth literature if an Indian man writing in English, proficient enough, skillful enough, master enough, you see, then how can you really put him into a kind of a territory or periphery as one of the tools they have to hand? Well, now Rusdie says, perhaps I am oversimplifying, but the point is perhaps well understood. There is also an interesting north-south divide. Then he moves to another important linguistic kind of a war or tension that now and then suddenly shoots its head up. He says there is always a kind of a north and south divide in Indian attitudes to English. In the north, in the so-called Hindi belt, where the capital like Delhi is located, it is possible to think of Hindi as a future national language. But in South India, which is at present suffering from the attempts of central government to impose this national language on it, the resentment of Hindi is far greater than of English. So because of the political reasons, you see what happened in India, still we don't really have one language which is accepted all over the country as the national language, right? And the way the politics is played, especially in southern states, many South Indians, they dislike Hindi. They may know Hindi, but they prefer not to talk in Hindi or to understand Hindi. So if they have to communicate with you, you don't know Malayalam, you don't know Telugu, Tamil, so how will you communicate with them? And how will they communicate with you? Though he and we all are Indians, and there English is playing a very important role. So Rusdie says that I have, after spending a lot of time in South India, I have become convinced that English is an essential language in India. Essential. You know, for any person who wants to travel all over India quite confidently without any kind of a problem or inconvenience, it is a must that he or she knows English, perhaps Hindi, and one more language that might be his or her mother tongue. Not only because of its technical vocabularies, because after all, in spite of all the translations and enrichment of other languages, still many subjects have all the research books written, majority of them are written in English, and they are not properly translated yet. So apart from this technical aspect, the vocabularies, see, that you find there that you need to know, the international communication, that is the second, as I said, the link language, international link language, also simply to permit two Indians to talk to each other in a tongue which neither party hates. So in the present scenario, English has virtually taken that very important role of not just an international link language, but even an Indian link language. So if you move from one state to another state in India, and especially if you are talking in a literate group, an educated group, then perhaps the language that everybody understands overall and can somehow manage to speak and understand is English, not Hindi, not any other language. So here Rusdie is therefore trying to argue that for whatever reasons, might be political, might be other linguistic, might be some regional, whatever might be the reason, but the fact is that in India, English has taken a very important position, and therefore people living in India have all the right and all the opportunity and scope to express themselves in English quite confidently, skillfully, masterfully. Incidentally, in West Bengal, where there is a state-led move against English, actually here Rusdie is referring to something which happened almost say 15 years ago, when the CPM was in room. The following graffiti is a slogan, actually it's a plural term, graffato, from there it has come graffiti, slogan or writings, a sharp dig attack at the state's Marxist Chief Minister Jyoti Basu appeared on a wall. In English, it said, "My son won't learn English, your son won't learn English, but Jyoti Basu will send his son abroad to learn English." So what is he doing here? Why is Rusdie suddenly making a very highly political comment? It might seem as if he is an anti-Marxist, but he has nothing of that sort. Here Rusdie is making actually one point very clear, and that is that, well, one political party or another political party or some particular parties in the center or in a state, for one reason or the other, might try to promote one regional language at the expense of English. But the fact is that because in a country like India, where you have so many different states, so many different languages, so many different traditions, right? You really cannot have, you cannot really refuse English its own place, whatever might be the reason. And because the certain advantages that go along with learning in English, when you learn English, see, in the previous paragraph, Rusdie talks about the technical vocabularies. In the same manner, you have all the opportunities of coming across perhaps all the best that has been done and researched, translated into English. You may not get them in Bengali, you may not get them everything in Hindi perhaps, but there is a high chance that you will get everything, the best of the research, translated into English. So Rusdie here in 2 or 3 paragraphs is therefore arguing how, because of many reasons, English has gained its importance, attained a kind of a very important place, and for which, in fact, the British doesn't really have any credit to claim. One of the points I want to make is what I have said indicates. I hope that Indian society and Indian literature have a complex and developing relationship with the English language, which I just right now pointed out to you or analyzed. That for one reason or the other, in some way or the other, what happened is that English became important and essential. And this kind of post-colonial dialectic is a logical argument. This kind of a post-colonial dialectic is propounded as one of the unifying factors in Commonwealth literature. Now, he says that, well, interestingly, how English has become essential, this particular factor, which is perhaps applicable and relevant in India, is sometimes misused as one common factor in Commonwealth literature, which is not really common. So he says, it clearly does not exist, or at least is far more peripheral to the problems of literatures in Canada, Australia, even South Africa. So what is true or what is relevant here in India is actually not relevant in Canada or Australia or in South Africa. So it is absolutely wrong to put this cause, to put forward this cause of saying that, well, this is something very common in all the so-called Commonwealth nations, right? Every time you examine the general theories of Commonwealth literature, they come apart in your hands. Okay? And the last point that I would like to touch upon today, before I would just come to you and ask you if you have any query, English literature has its Indian branch. Now here, obviously, the conclusion, natural conclusion is, therefore, there is no reason that we should consider English as a foreign tongue. By this I mean the literature of the English language. He says English, therefore, is not anything which is monopolized or mastered by only the British or all the native English speakers, but rather English is here, the literature of the English language. Just as Bengali literature is literature written in Bengali, English literature is literature written in English. And no nation, no country can claim authority over it or mastery over it. This literature is also Indian literature. Mark that. Also Indian. So if the British can claim over it, if the Americans have a say over it, so would all the Indians. There is no incompatibility here. And there is no reason to consider that, well, perhaps we cannot have the same kind of authenticity, same kind of claim over English. No. If history creates complexities, let us not try to simplify them. And if for one reason or the other, geopolitical reason, any other reason, if, well, there is some kind of a problem, well, we should not try to deviate from our main argument. So English is an Indian literary language. Mark that. I have purposely highlighted it. And by now, thanks to the writers like Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore, Desani, Chaudhary, Neeraj C. Chaudhary, Mulk Rajanand, Raja Rao, Anita Desai, and others, it has quite a pedigree. Pedigree is a lineage. So it is just not one author, rather decades after decades, very good authors who wrote in English and very authentic, creditable English, right? So now we can really boast of Indians writing in English, very good quality, high quality English, like Jawaharlal Nehru, like a number of other writers. See, now it is certainly true that the English language literatures of England, Ireland, and the USA are older than, for example, the Indian. True, he says, no doubt. Well, if the British says that, well, we wrote before you, true, you wrote before us. So what? Just because you wrote before us doesn't mean that we are writing inferior. So it's possible that Commonwealth literature is no more than an ungainly name for the world's younger English literatures. So he says, well, therefore, I just can't accept this particular terminology only because we have started later than the British or the Americans or the Irish. Okay? If there were true, or rather, if that were all, it would be a relatively unimportant misnomer. Misnomer is a wrong name. So it's a wrong name that is being given. And if at all, it is simply a name, now says Rusdie, but it isn't all, because the term is not used simply to describe or even misdescribe, but also to divide. That's a very important statement. So the real purpose is not simply, to categorize. Sometimes, for the sake of convenience, we say somebody A and somebody B, somebody C and something else D. But here, not simply that. It permits academic institutions, publishers, critics, and even readers to dump what you are talking unnecessarily. You should not talk when I am seriously analyzing certain things. You should be responsible enough. Now, so he says that, well, therefore the real intention is objectionable, and the intention is to derogate. The intention is to say that you are inferior. It permits academic institutions, publishers, critics, and even readers to dump a large segment of English literature into a box and then more or less ignore it. So that is what, see, this condescending tendency, this patronizing tendency, that is what Rusdie is against. At best, what is called Commonwealth literature is positioned below. This is a very important word. He says, this is the problem, below. English literature proper. So we write proper English literature, and whatever you may be doing, whosoever you may be, and whatever you are, right, you are all below us. To come back to my friend, the dawn, it places English literature at the center and the rest of the world at the periphery. So you understand? That is where the main contention of Rusdie lies. That is what he is objecting and protesting against. And he says how depressing that such a view should persist in the study of literature long after it has been discarded in the study of everything else English. That's very interesting. When you are talking about, say, science, or when you talk about social studies, when you talk about any other branch of studies, you don't say, well, this is Commonwealth or this is inferior. But the moment you talk about literature in English language, immediately you start to divide and start to put it into that kind of a categorization, only to say, whatever you may be doing, you are inferior. Okay, so now I stop there and stop sharing my screen and allow you to speak if you have any question to ask. So I'm unmuting all of you, and you can now unmute yourself and ask me if you have any question. Could you understand what I try to explain to you? So there are very important certain chapters, certain paragraphs from the essay which I try to analyze and make clear to you. Anybody
Sir,
has?
why does
Yes, Aditi, continue.
Sir, why does Rusdie call his friend a literary don?
Literary don, just because he is supposed to be a master in literature. That is just a passing reference. Try to understand that when somebody who is a person of authority says something, it holds water and people start accepting it without much debate. So he is referring to the one incident. Actually, the essay began, if you remember, by an anecdote. And here he is saying that, well, he's just referring to one of his friends who has become an authority in literature. And he says that clearly there is a divide. Yeah, any other question? Anybody?
So at the very first page, it says, by this point, Commonwealth was becoming unpopular with me. What does that mean?
Where is that? Is it from the portion that I covered today?
No, sir. It's on the very first page.
Yeah, on the very first page, there was a line. Can you just say it again?
Yeah, by this point, the Commonwealth was becoming unpopular with me.
Yeah, unpopular with Rusdie. And I have all the analysis, all the arguments that I explained today, given by Rusdie, are the reasons why they are becoming unpopular, because he could understand the real motive behind it. He could understand the very mean kind of a narrow mentality behind this. They're not doing any justice. Actually, the intention is to say that, hey, people, you may try to write very good novels and other things in English, but don't dare to come near us. Don't think that you have become better than us, or don't think that you can write as good as we are. That is the mentality against which Rusdie is protesting in this essay. And this is the reason, obviously, why he said that, well, the word or the term